a private clinic in Mexico City, July 1997. On an operating table, under anesthetic, lies a man in his early 40s. He is not there because he was shot or stabbed or injured in any of the ways men in his world usually end up on a table like this one. He is there by choice. He has paid a team of surgeons an enormous sum to do something very specific. He wants them to change his face. At this moment, the man on that table is, by the estimate of more than one government, the most powerful drug trafficker in Mexico. Perhaps the most powerful in the entire hemisphere. He commands an organization that moves cocaine by the ton, that owns a private fleet of jet aircraft, that has accumulated a fortune some analysts placed in the billions of dollars. He is wealthier at his peak than almost any criminal who came before him. And he is lying on this table trying to erase himself. New face, new fingerprints, where possible. A new man to walk out of a world that had become too hot, too watched, too dangerous to survive in his own skin. He will not walk out. By the next day, he will be dead, and his death will become one of the strangest and most disputed in the entire history of the Mexican drug trade. His name was Amado Carrillo Fuentes, but almost no one called him that. They called him El Señor de los Cielos, the Lord of the Skies. This is the story of the organization he built, the Juarez Cartel. For a period in the 1990s, the most powerful drug trafficking organization in all of Mexico. The empire of the man who tried to disappear. But more than that, it is the story of how that empire rose on a betrayal, ruled the most valuable smuggling corridor on the continent, and was finally destroyed by a war with the one rival it could not defeat, a war that turned a Mexican border city into one of the deadliest places on earth. And it is the story of how, nearly 30 years after the Lord of the Skies died on that operating table, the last surviving boss of his empire now sits in an American courtroom, waiting to learn whether he will spend the rest of his life in prison. To understand the man on the table, we have to go back to a family from the state of Sinaloa, to the same rural highlands that produced so many of the figures who would come to define this story. The Carrillo Fuentes brothers were not at first builders of anything. They were nephews. Their uncle was a man named Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, known across the drug world as Don Nato, one of the founding figures of the organization that, in the 1980s, dominated the entire Mexican drug trade from the city of Guadalajara. It was Don Nato who introduced his nephews to the business, who brought them in, who taught them how the trade worked at the highest level. Amado, the most capable of them, learned something else as well as skill that would come to define his entire career. He came up in part under an older generation of border traffickers who had pioneered a method most of their rivals never mastered: the use of aircraft to move drugs. Not cars, not trucks, planes. He absorbed that lesson completely, and one day he would build the largest air smuggling operation Mexico had ever seen. But that was still years away. In the early 1980s, the center of everything was Guadalajara, and the Guadalajara organization was, for a time, untouchable. It controlled the routes, the corruption, the relationships with the Colombian suppliers. It operated with a confidence that bordered on impunity. And then, in 1985, that confidence produced the single greatest mistake in the early history of the Mexican cartels. In February of that year, a U.S. drug enforcement agent named Enrique Camarena, known to almost everyone as Kiki, was abducted in Guadalajara. He had been working undercover, and his investigations had struck directly at the heart of the Guadalajara organization's operations. Weeks later, his body was found. He had been killed. The murder of a U.S. federal agent changed everything. The American response was unlike anything the Mexican drug trade had experienced before. The United States launched one of the most aggressive investigations in the history of its drug enforcement agency. Pressure descended on the Mexican government on a scale it could not ignore. And one by one, the leaders of the Guadalajara organization were hunted down, including the men identified as responsible for the agent's death. And eventually, Amado's own uncle, Don Neto. The killing of Kiki Camarena marked one of the lowest points in the entire relationship between the United States and Mexico. It is, to this day, one of the defining events in the history of American drug enforcement. A wound that shaped the agency's posture toward the Mexican cartels for the next 40 years. And in the world of the cartels, it produced an immediate, practical consequence. It shattered the organization that had held everything together. With the Guadalajara leadership imprisoned or on the run, the great organization could no longer function as a single hierarchy. And so, according to multiple accounts, in a meeting held before the final arrests, its territory was carved up, distributed among the regional operators who had served beneath it, each given control of a piece of the map. One man received control of Sinaloa. His name was Joaquin Guzman, the man the world would later know as El Chapo. Remember him. He will return to this story, and when he does, he will end it. Another corridor went to the family of the Carrillo Fuentes. The corridor that ran through one specific city, a city pressed directly against the United States border, across the river from El Paso, Texas. One of the single most valuable pieces of ground in the entire drug trade. Ciudad Juarez. But Amado Carrillo Fuentes was not yet the boss of Juarez. He was a lieutenant. The organization there was led by another man, a veteran trafficker named Rafael Aguilar Guajardo. And here we arrive at the betrayal on which the entire empire would be built. In 1993, Aguilar Guajardo was murdered while on a trip to the resort city of Cancun. For years, the killing was attributed to various rivals and various theories. But according to U.S. court documents cited in later proceedings, the truth was closer to home. Those documents describe the murder as, in effect, an inside job orchestrated by Aguilar Guajardo's own top lieutenant, by Amado Carrillo Fuentes. The lieutenant had removed the boss, and with the boss gone, Amado took everything. From that point, according to those same court records, the Juarez Cartel did not merely continue, it grew immensely. And it grew because Amado finally had the freedom to build the operation he had been imagining his entire career. The operation that would earn him his name. While other traffickers moved their product the way it had always been moved, in cars, in trucks, in hidden compartments, crossing the border a few kilograms at a time, Amado Carrillo Fuentes thought on a completely different scale. According to U.S. authorities, he assembled a fleet of large aircraft, not small planes, full-size jets by numerous accounts, including commercial airliners such as Boeing 727s, capable of carrying enormous loads across vast distances. He used them to fly cocaine in bulk out of Colombia and other parts of South and Central America into clandestine airstrips in Mexico, from where the product could be moved north and across the border into the United States. He was not smuggling kilograms. He was smuggling tons. Multi-ton shipments again and again, carried through the open sky while the authorities watched the roads below. That was why they called him the Lord of the Skies. The timing of his rise was perfect. In the early 1990s, the great Colombian organizations of the previous decade, the cartels of Medellin and the men who had run them were collapsing under the weight of their own wars and the relentless pressure of the United States. As the Colombians fell, the balance of power in the cocaine trade shifted north. The Colombians still produced the product, but increasingly, it was the Mexican organizations that controlled the routes into the largest drug market on earth. And of all those Mexican organizations, in those years, none was more powerful than the one run by the Lord of the Skies. His relationships ran south to the great cocaine suppliers of Colombia, including the organization that rose to dominance after Medellin fell, the Cali operation, which preferred quiet business to open war. And his relationships ran north, deep into the distribution networks of the United States. His wealth, by the mid-1990s, was almost impossible to calculate. The estimates that circulated ran into the billions of dollars. He owned properties, businesses, aircraft, and entire networks of corrupted officials across multiple Mexican states. He moved, by some accounts, between dozens of safe houses and residences, never staying in one place too long. And his style was the opposite of the showman. This is the detail that matters most about Amado Carrillo Fuentes, and the one that connects him to so many of the other great survivors of this world. He did not seek attention. He did not chase fame. He preferred quiet arrangements to open war, bribery to bloodshed, business to spectacle. He understood, as well as anyone in the history of the trade, that the most dangerous thing a man in his position could attract was the attention of the people hunting him. He spent corruption money the way other men spent ammunition, generously, strategically, and constantly. According to U.S. authorities, the corruption network he maintained reached into multiple levels of the Mexican security apparatus. For a time, it seemed to make him untouchable. For a few years, that strategy made him the single most powerful trafficker in Mexico. But by 1997, the attention had come anyway. The pressure on the Juarez Cartel had become enormous. His name had become too well known in Mexico and in the United States. The protection that money had bought him was beginning to fail. Both governments were closing in. And Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the man who had built an empire on the principle of staying unseen, made a decision that was either brilliant or desperate, depending on who tells it. He decided to disappear completely, not into hiding, into a new identity. He would change his appearance so thoroughly that the most wanted face in Mexico would simply cease to exist. A new face, a new body, a new man, free to walk through a world that no longer recognized him. And so, in July of 1997, he checked into a private clinic in Mexico City under a false name, and a team of surgeons began the long operation to remake him. He did not survive it. According to the official account, he died during or shortly after the procedure, a combination, by the official version, of the surgery and the medications involved. The most powerful drug lord in Mexico was gone. Not in a raid, not in a shootout. On an operating table, by his own choice, trying to become someone else. The story did not end cleanly. The surgeons who performed the operation were later found dead. And for years afterward, rumors persisted that the death itself had been staged, that the Lord of the Skies had succeeded, that he had walked out of that clinic with a new face after all, and that the body presented to the world was someone else's. Reported sightings drifted in from various countries. None of them were ever confirmed. No conclusive evidence ever supported the idea that he had survived. But the rumors attached themselves to him the way they always do, to men who spend their entire lives being invisible, and they have never fully gone away. What is certain is what happened to the empire he left behind, because the death of Amado Carrillo Fuentes did not destroy the Juarez Cartel. It simply passed the empire to the next man in the family, his younger brother, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. Vicente would come to be known by his own alias in this world, El Viceroy. And under him, for a time, the Juarez Cartel remained one of the most powerful organizations in Mexico. It still controlled that priceless corridor between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso. It still moved tons of cocaine and other drugs into the United States. It still commanded immense wealth and a network of armed operators and corrupted officials. For several years, the most important relationship in Vicente's world was not a rivalry. It was an alliance. The Juarez Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel, the organization led by El Chapo, were partners. The two most powerful trafficking groups in Mexico, working the corridors together rather than fighting over them. As long as that alliance held, the violence stayed contained. The two organizations shared routes, shared contacts, and divided the most valuable smuggling ground on the continent between them. It held until 2004, and then it broke in the worst way an alliance between two armed empires can break. According to U.S. federal prosecutors, the rupture came down to blood. In 2004, El Chapo allegedly ordered the killing of one of Vicente's brothers, Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes. It was an act that could not be answered with anything but blood in return, and Vicente answered it. In retaliation, according to the same prosecutors, he ordered the killing of one of El Chapo's brothers. Two of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world had just killed each other's family. There was no coming back from that. What followed was one of the bloodiest wars in the history of the Mexican drug trade. The Juarez Cartel and the Sinaloa Cartel turned everything they had against each other. And the battleground, more than anywhere else, was the prize itself, Ciudad Juarez. The city that both sides needed to control, because whoever held it held the doorway into the largest drug market on earth. The Juarez Cartel did not fight that war with its leadership alone. It fought through its armed enforcement wing, an organization that came to be known as La Línea, made up in part of current and former police officers, and feared throughout the region. And it fought through the cross-border street gangs that served as its foot soldiers, gangs whose members operated on both sides of the border, including inside the United States. Against them, the Sinaloa Cartel pushed back with everything it had. Its own enforcers, its own networks, its own seemingly endless supply of armed operators. And caught in the middle was an entire city of ordinary people. For a period in the late 2000s and the early 2010s, Ciudad Juarez became one of the deadliest cities anywhere in the world. Not a war zone in some distant country. A major city directly on the border of the United States, visible from El Paso. Texas itself, one of the safest cities in America across a narrow river. In its worst years, Ciudad Juarez recorded more than 3,000 homicides in a single year, giving it, for a time, one of the highest murder rates on the planet. Businesses closed by the thousands. Families fled across the border or deeper into Mexico. An entire generation of children grew up inside a war between two organizations fighting over the ground beneath their feet. The Mexican government deployed thousands of soldiers and federal police to the city. For a time, the violence only seemed to intensify. The war ground on for years, consuming lives, money, and territory on both sides. And in the end, the Juarez Cartel lost. The Sinaloa Cartel, larger, wealthier, and more powerful slowly ground its rival down through years of attrition. The corridor that the Lord of the Skies had turned into the most profitable smuggling route in Mexico slipped, piece by piece, into the control of his enemies. The organization that had once been the most powerful in the entire country became, in the words of one analysis, a shadow of its former self. Its remnants fractured into smaller cells, some of which still operate in the region today, still occasionally clashing with the Sinaloa organization over the scraps of what was once an empire. The fall of the family followed the fall of the cartel. On the 9th of October 2014, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes el Viceroy, the brother of the Lord of the Skies, the last great boss of the Juarez Cartel, was captured at a checkpoint in northern Mexico. Police said he had been keeping a low profile, living quietly, far from the spectacle of his organization's violent peak. He was at that point one of the most wanted men in the country, with a multi-million-dollar reward on his head offered by both the Mexican and the American governments. He was tried and convicted in Mexico and sentenced to 28 years in prison. For a decade, that was where the story seemed to end. The cartel broken, the corridor lost, the last boss behind Mexican bars, his organization a memory. But the story was not finished, because in early 2025, under enormous pressure from the United States government, Mexico did something extraordinary. The pressure had been building. The administration in Washington had begun designating major Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, a sharp escalation in how the United States classified and pursued them. It had threatened severe economic measures, including steep tariffs on Mexican goods, if Mexico did not move more aggressively against the trafficking organizations. And in response, in February of 2025, Mexico transferred 29 high-level cartel figures across the border into American custody in a single, coordinated operation, sending them to federal courts in cities across the United States. It was an unprecedented show of cooperation, and the list of names was staggering. Among those sent north were some of the most significant figures in the entire history of the Mexican drug trade leaders, enforcers, and operatives from nearly every major organization. Among them was the man accused of involvement in the killing of the U.S. agent Kiki Camarena 4 decades earlier. Among them were the brothers who had once led the most militarized cartel in Mexico's history. And among them was Vicente Carrillo Fuentes. On the 27th of February 2025, the last great boss of the Lord of the Skies empire was extradited to the United States. He was taken, along with several others, to a federal courthouse in Brooklyn, New York, the same courthouse where El Chapo himself had been tried and convicted years earlier. The symbolism could not have been sharper. The boss of Juarez, brought to justice in the same room as the boss of the rival cartel that had destroyed him. He faces charges, according to U.S. prosecutors, that include running a continuing criminal enterprise, drug trafficking, money laundering, and ordering the murders of rivals, charges contained, in part, in an indictment that had been waiting for him since the year 2000. A federal judge granted his defense a window to negotiate a possible plea agreement, one that might spare him a sentence of life in prison. And at the start of 2026, in an American courtroom, Vicente Carrillo Fuentes pleaded not guilty. As of this telling, his case is unresolved. Under the American system, he is presumed innocent until that case reaches its conclusion. But the larger meaning is hard to miss. The empire that began in the early 1990s when a lieutenant removed his own boss and seized control of a border city has finally arrived at its last chapter. And that chapter is being written not in Ciudad Juarez, not in Mexico at all, but in a courtroom in the country that the Lord of the Skies spent his life sending cocaine into by the ton. And so we are left, as we so often are with these stories, with a set of questions that may never have clean answers. Did Amado Carrillo Fuentes truly die on that operating table in 1997? Or did the Lord of the Skies succeed in the one thing he had always done best, disappearing? What became of the immense fortune the cartel accumulated at its peak? A fortune that was never fully recovered, and that some believe is still hidden, still moving, somewhere in the world. How much of the corridor he built still carries drugs today, under new names and new owners? And what will Vicente Carrillo Fuentes, the last man alive, who watched the entire arc, from the rise under his brother, to the war with Sinaloa, to a cell in the United States, say, if he ever decides to say anything at all about what he knows? Some of those answers may emerge in an American courtroom in the months ahead. Others, as so often happens in the history of organized crime in Mexico, may never come at all. What is certain is this: the Juarez Cartel rose on a single act of betrayal, a lieutenant turning on the boss who trusted him. It reached the very top of the Mexican drug trade on the back of a fleet of aircraft and a man who understood better than almost anyone. The power belongs to those who are not seen. It outgrew its Colombian suppliers, outmaneuvered its government, and built a fortune large enough to rival entire economies. And it was destroyed in the end. Not by any government, but by a war with a former ally, a war that began with the killing of two brothers and ended with the slow collapse of an entire empire. And that left a city on the American border, counting its dead by the thousands. The man at the center of it spent his final hours trying to erase his own face, to become someone new, to disappear completely and forever from a world that had finally turned its full attention on him. But an empire is not a face. It cannot be changed on an operating table. In the world he built, the corridor, the air fleet, the fortune, the war, the city that paid the price. The brother who inherited it all and lost it all outlived him by nearly 30 years and is still being settled to this day in a courtroom on the other side of the border. He spent his life crossing in the dark. The Lord of the Skies wanted more than anything to be forgotten. It is the one thing his empire would never allow. If this story showed you the hidden complexity behind the headlines, subscribe to Sleeping Crimes. Every week, we unravel the stories we need to understand. Not to glorify crime, but to understand its real impact. Turn on notifications. We'll see you at the next crime.